Kimberly is an international educator, curriculum specialist, and teacher trainer for over 15 years, with over 15 years of experience in English language education across 5 countries and 2 continents. Holding a BA in English from Boy State University and an MA in Applied Linguistics from the University of Ma- Massachusetts. Boston, Kimberly has dedicated her career to making language learning dynamic, relevant, and accessible. From 2022, I'm just skipping because of time, to 2024, she served in the US Department of State Virtual Educator Program, training pre-service teachers in Mexico and guiding them in the use of educational technology and low no tech strategies for their local context. Currently, Kimberly is a curriculum manager and teacher at Think Talk, where she not only teaches students in China, but also empowers fellow educators with strategies to design engaging tech enhanced lessons. A strong advocate for AI integration in curriculum planning, Kimberly is passionate about helping educators save time and spark creativity through the use of innovative tools. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give Kimberly a warm TETC welcome as she leads us in the next session. Thank you. Great to have you, Kimberly.
Hi. All right, can everyone hear me? Yes. I'm not sure. Can you guys hear me or not? I'm hoping that you all can hear me. Can I get a thumbs up? Okay, now I can see everyone.
We can hear you clearly. We can hear you clearly.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, so thank you everyone so much for attending today. I really appreciate also the facilitators that were able to make it possible. Last year I was able to join from the United States. This year I'm joining you from Croatia, from Zagreb. So it's great to be part of this and to be with you all there virtually. So I would like to focus today on more than a lesson plan. How is it that we can use AI to help us in developing different tools and different deliverables that we can use within the classroom? So today I'm going to focus really more on practical strategies that you can use within your classroom. And we'll also look at examples of how you can use it, whether you're teaching students face-to-face or whether you're teaching students online. And it can be used really flexibly depending on the type of technology that you have access to within your classroom. Whether it's something where you have students with devices and they're able to use that in the classroom, or whether students have no technology at all and you don't have any technology in the classroom, but you have access to it before your lessons. We'll look at ways that you can adapt it based on also your tech setup. So I would like to share my screen. If you can just give me one moment. Okay. All right. Hopefully, can everyone see the PowerPoint that I'm sharing? I can't see all of you, so I'm assuming that everyone can see the PowerPoint on their screen now, hopefully. Yes? Okay, great. Now I can see it. All right. So one of the things I wanted to start with is really the why. So why is it that we want to use technology? Technology is best when it brings people together. And I think this really echoes what we were discussing and what we learned about in the previous session is, the idea that learning is collaborative, that we learn from other people, that learning is the most meaningful when we're to influence the world around us. And technology can be a great tool to enable us to do that, to bring people together and to have more engagement in learning. So I just want to ask you, first of all, in the chat, or I know some of you are there in person as well, you're welcome to also speak up. What is something that you find yourself spending too much time on? So let's say you already have your lesson plan, but you want to enhance it, or if there's something that you want to add to your lesson, what is something that you find takes a lot of your time when you're doing lesson plans? So any of you there as well in person, you can speak up. I believe you have a microphone if anyone is brave enough to share, or those of you who are watching and can message in the chat.
All
I
right,
hope
good
one
afternoon.
comment that there's maybe a bit of an echo. Hopefully it's okay.
Good afternoon. I would say practical simulation for physics teacher. So, in case you don't have your lab available, but you want to make them see practical aspects of the topic in real life, simulation. Thank you.
Mhm. Great. Simulations? Yes, absolutely. So, being able to use it, like your example, that you may not always have access to all of the tools that you need there. So we'll talk about how you might even encounter, when you encounter this problem, some possible solutions and how AI might be able to help. I see Zainab also with instructional resources. Absolutely. Creating the resources that you're going to be using to help deliver your lessons. That can be very time consuming. And that's exactly what we'll look at today as well. Okay. Activities for students. Yes, so what can we do after we finish our piece of giving some instruction when we turn it over to students and ask them to also actually use what it is that the target skill that can be very time consuming. To get instructional materials teaching grammar in the English language, of course. And there's also a lot of, I think one thing too, there can be a lot of resources online, but sometimes I'm sure many of you have experienced where sometimes searching for those resources can also be very time consuming. And so, even though, especially, I know from my personal experience in teaching English and grammar for a very long time, there's so many resources. You can find a lot of resources, but how do you customize it and make it really more applicable to your student and the context and their exact needs? And I think that's where AI and technology are can help to fill the gap. Practical aspects, absolutely. Practical application, which, like we talked about in the previous session, learning is best when students can actually apply it to their lives, when there's actually some context that students can use to really apply the learning to their actual lives, to their communities, and to their world. Appropriate and differentiated. I love that Ms. Dorcas said differentiated. That's absolutely what we're going to talk about today. Different activities. Great. Thank you all so much for sharing. I really appreciate it. So all of these are the same things that I think many of us can have experience with. So we're going to be looking at those today. So beyond the lesson plan. So a lot of times we've looked at how AI can help us with actually developing the lesson plan, but then what? And actually, personally, in my experience, sometimes I already know what it is that I want to teach. I don't necessarily need AI to help me in developing the lesson plan. I need it more in executing the lesson plan. Like, how do I actually create the lesson plan with AI tools? Because I already have the idea in my mind. Sometimes it can be helpful when you're teaching a new course. You may not know where to start, but if you've already been teaching the course many times, but you want to adjust it more for your current learners or to modify it, then that's really where I think that AI is even more effective. In my experience, the real time sync is, like you all said, in what comes afterwards. So I'm going to look today, we're going to be looking at three different topics. So enriching, differentiating, and assessing. And basically how we can use AI to design different handouts, graphics, and other tools. So this session is really more of a practical guide to help you, just based on my own experience and what I found is helpful. At any point, if you also would like to share some ideas, strategies, or your own experience in the chat, please feel free. But this is just based on my own experience and what I found. The other thing I wanted to mention too is this is basically where AI is right now. So these tools or some of the things I'm showing you are new things that I found within, let's say, the last year that the technology has expanded to. Of course, it's ever adapting. So these are things that AI could not do that well, even for example, like a year and a half ago. So we don't know, even maybe in next year's conference, it might even be a different conversation. There might be even different tools. So that's always the caveat, is that it's always expanding. And so really, to be the best teachers and to save us the most time, sometimes it helps to kind of challenge AI. Or if you see that there's an update that comes out, I only discovered these things because if I just accepted, oh, AI can't do that, I never would have discovered its true capabilities and its current capabilities. So I always encourage teachers to make sure that they're also trying different things. Maybe it didn't work for you, try again in 6 months. You might have a different experience as they're constantly updating these tools. So, like I said, today's framework today, there are 3 different areas I want to look at. One is using AI for enrichment, for differentiating, and as well as for assessment. So under enrichment, we're going to be looking at ways that you can take your lesson and things that you can add to it. So looking at different charts, mind maps, infographics, discussion activities, different project ideas that you can do. Differentiation, so looking at how you can meet the needs of the learners based on, they might have a different reading level, they might have a different language level in the target language, they might have a different ability level when it comes to their skills. They might be much higher or they might be much lower than their peers. And how is it that you can teach to the whole class, not just to the middle of the class? And finally, assessment, how you can use AI to create things such as rubrics, exit tickets, self-assessment, and I'll talk briefly as well about how you can also use it for summative assessment, not just for formative assessment. I want to talk first, though, about why. So why is it? Why are these things important? So enrichment, why is it important to enrich your lesson? So I think it's important because students have different learning styles, and there might be some things that work for some learners, but then there might be another group that needs more support. You can adapt it to different learning styles or even different interests. Let's say even if you were teaching a group of students that really needed a little bit more interaction, or maybe they have some attention issues, versus a group of students you might teach the same material, they might be a little bit quieter. So you can adjust to different learning styles, not just different levels, but different styles. And engagement. So like in the previous session, how we were discussing how engagement is really important, getting students to collaborate, getting them to interact, getting students to really pay attention and to see how they can apply things to their own lives. And really, like I said, learning through application. So how can they practically use this in a contextualized way, in a meaningful way that they themselves can connect? And of course, to move students through the steps of the higher order thinking skills. So from doing basic things like being able to match or being able to recognize or identify, moving them through all the steps to where they're able to apply and to create. Differentiation, like I said, it's all about meeting the needs of all students. So whether that's students who come to you with different language abilities, different knowledge, or they might have unique needs where they might have, for example, a special education program where you need to make sure that you are meeting all of the things that they need. Maybe they need some extra time, maybe they need extra support, as well as, like I said, not just the highest learners or the lowest learners, you're meeting everyone, so of all different levels. Okay, and finally, assessment. So assessment's purpose is in driving instruction. So the whole point of assessment is to know what it is that we're doing, how students are learning, and also how we can improve. So the most important too is having formative assessment. So it's critical feedback when it matters. So if you're only doing assessment at the very end, it's not as helpful because it's too late. You've already finished the unit, you're moving on. But if you're doing assessment throughout, if you're doing formative assessment, then you're getting feedback as you go along to understand where it is that students need more support. And you can make those changes immediately. You don't need to wait until the end of the unit and realize it's too late. You can actually make a difference while the learning is still occurring. Okay, So now that we talked about the three domains and why they're important, I want to go into sort of a demo. It's a somewhat light demo. I will mention a couple of things here. So I'm actually just going to show you the prompts that I used, where I'm not going to do it all completely from the beginning. The reason is because some of them can take a while to generate. So obviously the goal with all of these tools is to save time, but I will say that some of these things can take a couple of minutes to generate. So they're not immediate. And just in the interest of time today, I'll just show you what I have already done. If we happen to have more time at the end, maybe we can do a little bit more of a live demo. But just in the interest of time, I'll show you the prompts that I used. One thing I wanted to point out is how specific the prompt is about structure. So not just the topic, but really what it is like. I give it the content that I am working with. I give it the structure of the output that I want. And I also want to show you how you can sort of coach or train AI to get it to give you better results, because really the key here is in your prompting. It's all within the prompting that you're giving it. So AI is only as good as you're able to also give it feedback and instruction. And sometimes it takes a while to get to the right place. So the caveat with all of this is make sure that it really is being a tool to save you time. If you find that it's actually slowing you down, that you can create resources faster by yourself, sometimes I'll talk about this a bit more later, but sometimes more isn't more. More technology does not always mean that it's faster. It does not always mean it's easier. It does not always mean it's better. So really a key part of that is using your judgment to make sure that it really is effective. Okay, so when you're giving input, before I go to show you, I want to mention here, when you're giving input, you need to be very specific about what it is that you are teaching. I find it best if I can actually give AI the exact material that I'm using. So you might actually be teaching something that is a very common topic. So, for example, about the water cycle, about fractions, about how to play basketball, about how to write an argumentative paper. So these are very common things that students would encounter, but it really depends on the context. So, for example, how old are your students? What level? Are there specific standards or education styles that your school does that you need to adapt it to? And like I said, be specific also about the content you want produced. If there's a specific format that you want, then you need to also be specific with that. So like I said, make sure to mention the format. When you're generating any sort of graphics, mention the format and the size you want. So not just the content. Make sure, do you want it widescreen? Do you want it to be an infographic? Do you want it to be a PDF, a Word document, or some sort of image? The way that I have been able to save the most time is I can create a project, or I can save certain things to memories. This way it can keep the same style. So if I found a style that's better, like for example, when I have a class of younger learners, I want kind of more of a kid-friendly, colorful, simplistic style. But if I'm teaching older students, I might want something that's a little bit more polished and a bit more age appropriate. So I would recommend saving some of the prompts that you use that you felt were effective. Another thing you can do is actually give it an example. So if you say, hey, you made this for me before, use the same style and create the next step. So I will often do that. If I find a good example of something that AI created for me, I will actually give it back to it and say, let's do it like this. Or maybe I find another example from the internet. Or maybe I even have something I've handwritten that I want to make it a little bit more polished. Then I will even take a picture sometimes if I have the idea in my mind. So like I said, you can actually feed it information. So having some setup steps like this can overall save you time. Like with anything, sometimes there is a bit of a time investment before it can save you time. Sometimes you need to invest a bit before you can really benefit from that. So let me go back to sharing. I believe I have to switch here. And hopefully you can see. Okay, I hope that everyone can see. Let me make sure. Hopefully, yes. Okay, now I can see my screen there. All right, so here is an example of, I'll just show you what I typed in so that you can get a good idea. Like I said, it will be a somewhat live demo, but I've already gone through the steps. So just in the interest of time, I'll show you what I did. So what I actually did was I gave a whole PDF of my teaching slides. Now, you may not be teaching using, or sorry, for this one, I'm sorry, I gave it a PDF. So from this PDF, I also had created a presentation, but I gave it the actual original material. So this is actually for a real class that I'm teaching, and this is a reading and writing course. And so students have to read a short article. The target is really for them to learn English, but it's within different domains. So for example, they're practicing reading and writing in English, but this happens to be a scientific topic about solar eclipses. So I actually gave it, rather than say I want to make a mind map about solar eclipses, AI might think that I'm looking mostly for a science lesson. But what I'm actually looking for is for students to really practice their English proficiency through using the content. But my goal is not really to teach a science lesson, it's to teach an English lesson using science. I'm not sure if I can make the screen. I hope some of you can see. If not, I will read it out for you so that if you're not able, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. Okay, is that a little bit easier to read? Yes, I hope you can see it a bit better. All right, so this is what I did. I just fed ChatGPT. I gave it the actual PDF that has the article, the comprehension questions, and the target vocabulary that I wanted students to learn. So this is, I'll just read for you what I wrote. So it's a bit long. So I said, I'm teaching a middle school, I said science lesson, but it's actually English/science. So I'm teaching a middle school lesson on solar eclipses as part of a unit on astronomy and the solar system. My class is a small online group of 6 to 10 students around age 13. I've attached the article we're using and the title. Create a mind map I can display on screen during our live class to help students visually organize the article's content. And then I gave it actually some information of how I want it to be structured. You don't always have to give it that information. Sometimes you can just say, do this, and then it will make up its own mind about how it wants to structure it. But if you have any specific preferences on what you want it to look like, you can tell it exactly. So you can say, structure it with solar eclipses as the central topic, and then branch it into what a solar eclipse is, why scientists study it, the tools and methods they use, what they've discovered so far, and key vocabulary. Keep each branch to short phrases, not full sentences, since students will be reading this on screen. Format it as a widescreen layout for screen sharing. So you can also see here, it took about 1 minute and 53 seconds, so almost 2 minutes for basically for it to generate this. And I'll show you the first thing that it generated. So why might this not be great? You might already have some ideas. Does anyone else in the chat have some ideas? Why might this actually not be a great example, this first iteration? Any ideas? So you can see here, it already has the answers. And it's kind of dark, like a dark background. So I don't actually want it to already have all the answers for students. In my mind, I actually wanted it, and maybe I should have specified, don't give the answers. Sometimes you need to specify. I actually don't want it to already say the answers for the students. I want it that me and my students together, that this will be an activity that we do as a class, or that students could do it in breakout rooms together. So I said, okay, well, this is good for an answer key, but leave it empty so students can fill it in together. Also, change it to a lighter background for easier viewing on screen, because sometimes having it, like with a darker background, it might be harder for students to see. And so then this is the second generation. So now it's updated with a lighter background, the response boxes are empty, and it's blank for students to complete together. So you know that it gives basically some more space for students to fill it in. Okay. So yes, this is very similar more to a science lesson. You can't see it here. The reason that it's really more a bit of an English or an English content ELL type lesson is in the comprehension question. So this is actually one of the higher levels. If you're familiar with Lexile levels, this is like a Lexile level 1280. And yes, you absolutely could use this as a science lesson. You could use it the same. So like I said, the class that I'm teaching is English, but also science together, but you could use it for a strictly science lesson too. It really depends on the level of your students. But if you're teaching something such as content ELL, so if you're teaching students the language through different content areas, through science, through technology, through social studies, that's the structure of my lessons, is that we're teaching English through the different content areas. So one week it's science, the next week it's a social issue, the next week it might be about cultural knowledge. Yes. Okay. So the other thing I wanted to mention is you can actually remove certain areas. So you can actually click on this, and I'll try to do it a little bit slow just in case there is any lag on the screen. So you can actually, what you can do here is you can describe the edits in the chat box. So I can actually type right here, make it blah, blah, blah. You can type it in there in the chat box. Another thing you can do is actually leave a comment. So if you want to comment, you can leave a comment there and describe the change and point to basically the exact point that there's a problem. So maybe you want to say change it to a red background, or change it to only have 3 boxes in this section. Whatever it is that you want to do, you can change it directly there. Another option is you can choose to remove certain things. So let's say I don't actually want, I think there's not enough space here for this graphic, so I can just go in there and I can ask it to remove it and then click send. I already had done that earlier, so let me just show you. So I actually told it remove the selected area, and then actually maybe I hadn't sent that part yet. So you can actually tell it to remove. You can tell it, for example, remove that part, and it will do that. So like I said, in the interest of time, we won't wait for it to do all of that. Let me go back to the next part. Okay. One thing I wanted to mention was, so this is what ChatGPT came up with. However, let me just show you what different tools look like and why some of them are better, because not all of them are actually so effective. The reason I chose ChatGPT for this is because it really is much better at doing these types of graphics. So let me show you some of the not great examples. So this is from Claude. Would not use it, would not recommend using it. It also filled in the answers, which is fine. But even if I asked it to remove it, it's really not great. So Claude is actually not the one that I would recommend, for example, for doing that. And then let me show you an example from Gemini. I know that there's many other tools. I know there's many different large language models. These are just the top 3 that I find myself using. Gemini, also not great. Even if I said use a lighter background, even if I said, add more boxes, it still really doesn't look, in my opinion, it's still not nearly as good as what ChatGPT is able to do. Okay, So mind maps are really great for brainstorming, reviewing, showing how ideas connect. I find them to be helpful because they're good at giving students structure to work with. Oftentimes, if you just start, for example, with an empty blank page, then students might struggle with that. So it's giving them something to at least start with, sort of like having sentence starters. So it's really better for giving them something so they're not just staring at a blank worksheet or a blank page. So I prefer to use some sort of basic uh, example for students to start with and to grow from there. It's also really good at encouraging metacognitive skills. So getting students to really think about how is it that this connects to prior knowledge that they've had? How can they group it? How are things connected to each other? How are they different? Mind maps are really great at doing that. And yes, I see, for example, in the chat, I apologize if the network is bad. I'll be sending, I believe afterwards, they'll send all of the presentations to you as well, so you can also see this later. And yes, absolutely. English sometimes is beyond grammar. Sometimes it's learning through other fields. Using AI to create mind map, you can create one for yourself using Canva. Absolutely, you can use Canva. That's one of the things that I also mentioned a little bit later on is that you have to choose the best tool for you. It may not be AI. Sometimes it's faster, and we're going to look actually at in a couple of slides. Sometimes you can use pre-made templates, and those might be better, those might be faster. You have to, as the teacher, you using your knowledge of your students, what it is that you need. And AI sometimes is more time consuming. Sometimes we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can use examples that have already been created. Absolutely. And I think what you mentioned as well, using your own original thoughts, not just letting AI create it for you. Absolutely. So, because you're the one who knows your students, you have your goals in mind, but using AI as a tool. Absolutely. Very, very great points. So, let me show you. Graphic organizers are also really good to use. I find myself using them for many different activities. So these are really great, especially when you have some sort of skill that you might put together. So using things that are, for example, often in reading, the way that they're used. So looking at, for example, compare and contrast, cause and effect, different sequencing events. You can use them for that. You can get either online ready versions or you can get offline printable ones. So, like I said, that's something where you can actually create it and you can print it or you can display it. Or you might, if you just have access to a chalkboard, you might get an idea about how you want to structure it. You might have students even copy it in their notebooks. So it really depends. Like I said, everything depends so much on your own context of what it is, the technology you have access to, the goals that you have for your students, and what they need. Graphic organizers are best when you have a clear structure in mind, when it's a little bit more fixed. So you might want to do a Venn diagram or a T-chart. I want to go back to what I was saying about sometimes you don't want to reinvent the wheel. So if I was going to use AI to create something like this, it's not a great use of my time. Why? Because I can already find these templates online. This is something that you can find many, many, many places where it's some sort of story elements where you're looking at the character, the setting, the plot, problem, solution, resolution. You can find a million different graphic organizers like this. I would not use AI to create something like this because you don't need to reinvent it. You can find many of these online on Canva or other resources. The way that I use it, and I'll show you, I was teaching a class on Where the Red Fern Grows, which is a novel for a fourth grade class I was teaching. And you can see here how this one is a little bit different. So this isn't exactly the same thing as the story elements. These are actually different things that I wanted students to think about. So we were looking at character development as well as theme and critical thinking. So those were really my goals. This was after we had finished reading the book and I wanted students to really be able to make some analysis or some judgment. So, like I said, this I would not use AI to generate, but this one was actually more helpful. So, I was able to prompt students to think about, for example, the character and his determination. What were his dreams, his obstacles, his choices? How is it that he changed the relationships? How did the relationships he had? How were those part of the determination? And then the last part, asking students to apply. So, is determination always a strength? Use one event from the novel. So this was a better use, in my opinion, of using AI, because you're actually able to adjust it to what it is that you're teaching. And the thing that I like to do as well is it actually uses the backdrop of where the story actually was. So it actually has some red ferns, and it's like an image of the mountains where similar to the story setting. So I like to use it to just make it a little bit more colorful, add some engagement, add some color, makes it a bit interesting for the students as well. That is not just generic. But like I said, it's really only worth my time if it's going to be asking different questions, because something like this I probably couldn't find online exactly in 5 minutes. But this one I could. Okay, so I want to go back to one of the questions, or one of the issues that someone had shared about what happens when you don't have access to all the resources you need. So, what happens, for example, if you don't have access to a lab where you can't take the results? So, you could actually, one possible workaround you could do would be to actually give students the data. Maybe you don't have a lab to create that experiment, but you could give sample data for students to analyze. If the goal was really to have students to start with some sort of data and to use it to analyze and to apply that information, maybe you don't have a lab to create those results, but you can ask AI to create a case file. You can ask it to give you some sort of data, and then students can use that as that could be one workaround. So you can actually use ChatGPT not just to describe a visual layout, but it can actually generate the data for you. That could be even in the different formats, like an Excel document. It could be a visualization. You could even use it to make posters. There's many different ways that you can use it to generate graphics. This is an example that I came up with that is for like an elementary math lesson, that you could use a picture graph if you wanted to generate some sample data. Again, these are things where you might already have some examples in the textbook. If you already have it in the textbook, then you may not need to use something like this. But if you need to generate random data, then it can help you to actually create a different graphic or visualization to help students. All right. Another thing you could do, so notice that students are not filling anything in here, but it's just to get students to begin thinking. If you were going to teach about debate, so helping to teach debate and finding a compromise, learning diplomatic or speech skills. So this is a sample topic about, for example, phone usage. Should phones be allowed in schools, or how could they be used responsibly? How could you take two different groups, like maybe the school admin versus the students, and find some regulations? And this could be an example too, where it might be solving a real issue that exists within the school. Maybe it's a current debate that's going on. So, like we said, any time that you can make learning more applicable to students and their environment, it's even better. And you can even take this example, have it generate a poster as a topic for discussion, looking at multiple sides of an issue. Okay. The one thing I want to mention is that sometimes AI goes overboard. It can be a little bit too much, a little bit extra. So notice that sometimes you might find that it generates something like this. It's over the top, it's too much. it's distracting, it's unnecessary. So you have to make sure that what it generates is actually not overwhelming to learners. It's really better if you can focus information. Even this is quite text heavy. I would not use this with younger students to have this much information visually. Especially, I wouldn't use this with any age group, not even with adults, for example, because it's really just too much. So you need to know also how to rein it in. If AI tends to kind of go off the rails and go overboard, that you can actually coach it and tell it to make it a bit more simple. So like I mentioned, like I was showing you earlier, there are ways that you can actually describe the edits. You can also change the aspect ratio. I don't think I showed this. I can show it in a minute. But you can actually click here, it says aspect ratio. What that does is if you click on it, you can choose the size. So if you want something to be widescreen, to be displayed on a PowerPoint slide, for example, you can do that. If you wanted to generate something that would be the size of a poster or the size of a social media post, for example, or if you wanted it to be square, if you want it to be in PDF format, you can actually do all of that. Okay. Another thing that you can do, like I mentioned, going along with this whole idea of engagement and enrichment, you can actually use it to give students, for example, case files or different projects. So this can be helpful too if you have different roles. So for example, let's say you give students a case file and you give them different pieces of evidence, but then let's say you want to give them different roles. So you could generate something like this, and then you could also generate small pieces of instruction or information for each of those roles. So it's really good for doing, especially if you have project-based learning, then you can use it to generate different aspects of a project. Personally, I love project-based learning, but one of the things that would sometimes in the past stop me from developing all of them is just the amount of time that it took. I didn't have time every single unit to make it a project-based unit because it can be very time-consuming to develop the different roles and different projects within those roles. So I would just in the past, I would be a little bit more selective when I was developing project-based learning. But this was before AI. Now that we have AI, it can save a lot of time. You can use it to develop different roles and different handouts for students so that they have different activities, different roles that they're going to do with the data you give them. Okay, let's look at the next example. So this one is an example of a science lesson. Especially it can help students to actually be able to visualize it. So if they're looking at all aspects of the water cycle, how does that happen? Then it can be helpful to have that. You can also use it to generate, for example, a visual dictionary. And the one thing I wanted to mention is really how you can adapt this. So AI it has as much creativity as you do. So if I was going to use this and I wanted to, this is getting a little bit into differentiation, which is our next topic. I could use this to differentiate the lesson in a few ways. So let's say I had a student who was maybe struggling, maybe they needed a little extra time, maybe their English proficiency was lower, maybe they didn't have as much experience, they hadn't finished some of the previous units, maybe they're new to the school. I might give students something that's already completed and ask them to spend their time to study it or to translate the words into their native language, for example, or to make a sentence with it. But if I had a group that needed more challenging, I might actually ask AI, okay, take this and instead of just leave the pictures, students need to add in the term and the definition. Or maybe I have a group of younger learners or ones that are enjoy more visual creativity. I might say leave the word and have students fill in a picture. So you could actually choose all different aspects of this to have students actually use it in a different way. So it could be like a template that students would actually fill in, or you could, like I said, it really depends on your goals. Is your goal really to have students more to visualize it, or maybe they can visualize it but they struggle with some of the vocabulary terms? or maybe they know the terms, but they struggle to actually define it in a specific way. So all of this is adaptable based on what it is that students want to do. Absolutely. There are very generative AI. I feel like my personal opinion is we're sort of, when it comes to AI, generative AI, it feels a little bit like we're in the dial-up internet stage of everything. We're still very new in all of this. It's still like a very new technology. So we can find that sometimes the graphics that it generates are really not great. Sometimes, especially with people, it might even look cartoonish. So you might have to ask it, make it look. Uh, Sometimes I have it remove the people. Sometimes the people turn out looking a bit too cartoonish, or they might turn out looking a bit strange. So sometimes I'll ask it, remove the people, make it more the style. Sometimes, or it will be too elevated and not kid friendly. So I would encourage you also to coach it in the style, the graphic style, or give it an example. In a traditional classroom, how could you use it where laptops are not available? It really depends. So if you already have, it depends on the resources you have. So if you're at if you have textbooks, maybe you just develop a worksheet that doesn't need graphics to go along with a textbook that already has visuals. If you are in a school that has access to printing and a generous principal or a school admin that doesn't mind you printing, then you could use it in place of that. If you want a more eco-friendly way to do it, you might actually just print it as a larger poster and have students fill out something else in their notebooks. It really depends on, like I said, the access to technology that you have, the goals of your lesson. But yeah, you could actually either display it, but if you don't have, for example, access to any sort of smart board or any projection, then you might print it and display it, or you might do stations. So sometimes what I would do to try to save paper is in a classroom, let's say I have 25 students, I might set up 5 stations. I use one paper where I printed it out and I've used a lot of resources in printing it. I might laminate it so I can save it and use it so I'm not using too much paper and ink in the future. And like I said, I might just take this and put it into 5 laminated stations that I collect the paper again, and I might have students work in small groups with some sort of worksheet. So there's a lot of different ways that you can look at also how to be more economical with using some of the actual resources. Okay, the next topic is with differentiation. I'm going to show you an example. This is another science topic, but let's say I have students, like I said, that might be new to English or that might have missed some of the previous units, or maybe they came from a different school where they hadn't encountered this, but maybe it's your student's second time to see this topic, talking about weather, for example. So you can change it into reading A and reading B. So they can actually look similar. One thing I try to do when I am differentiating resources is I try not to make it too obvious that students are receiving a different packet of something. I always want to be respectful of students, whether they are higher level learners or lower level learners. I always try to make it not too obvious. So I might even just I might just put a little star at the top of one. I might not even label it as reading A, reading B, or I certainly would avoid using things like lower level, higher level. So I try to make it so it's a little bit discreet. Okay, and finally, when we're talking about assessment, so for writing rubrics, you can actually give ChatGPT your existing rubric, ask it to refine it rather than building one from scratch. But like I said, there's a lot of resources on the internet. You can sometimes find one that's going to be just as effective. But you can ask it to generate a rubric. Like I said, again, you can display this, you could print out one, you could have it individual so that students could fill it out. If they have access to technology, they can fill it in electronically, saving paper. And students can use it to it can also be used as a self-assessment tool. And as well as for formative assessment, you could use things like exit tickets. So this might be, you can even tell it to make it so it can fit 6 on a page, and it's just a tiny little piece of paper. Students quickly fill it out, you collect it, and it gives you on the spot feedback about how it is that students are understanding. So this one I would print, for example, for an exit ticket. Um, One other thing I would mention too is in doing summative assessment, you could have one chat per class. So you can create, like, for example, in ChatGPT, you might label it as English 9, for example. And you might actually, sometimes you can even record a voice note and periodically record voice notes about how students are doing, and use that to keep track. Or you can actually type it in, take a picture of it, and then at the end of the semester or at the end of the term, you can ask it generate a report based that tells students' strengths and weaknesses. Yeah. So some final tips I would say: make sure to review and edit before using your students, and also know when not to use AI. Like I said, really make sure that you're still the brains of all of it, that you're adapting it to how it is that you can best use it, and that it really is saving you time in the end.